I see that it is right at 7 o'clock. And so we will get started. We know that your time is very valuable. And so we want to welcome you and thank you for being here with us tonight and sharing a little bit of your time with us. Before we get started, we are in a webinar format. And so I believe that the only things that you're going to be able to see on your screen is the presentation itself and then the presenter. And so we'll kind of walk through here just a little bit about how this is going to go as far as the presentation and the questions and answer session. But before we get started, I just wanted to introduce a few people. Many of them, or none of them I can see, as I said, because we're in this particular format, but we wanted to recognize our school board members who are on the call with us tonight, and our president, Amy Knott, Vice President Kelly Rowley, David Knoll is our secretary, and then our trustees, Sarah Mitchell, Kevin Cameron, Vatsa Ramanathan, and Dr. Polly Montgomery. And so thank you all for being here tonight, as well as all of our community members and parents who are on the meeting. And so we want this meeting to be fairly quick, but we also want it to be very informative. We want to answer any and all questions that you have. And we want to make sure that we, like we did for past elections here most recently, make sure that we continue our goal as to having an informed voter and informed community members. So as with all school district elections, this one is extremely important as well. But what is different, however, is that this is not a traditional election because it's one that we've never had to do before. And so we've had a lot of talk about it. We originally started back on this journey probably last year about this time. And of course, because of COVID, the election was put on hold. And we are now back at the point where we have to hold an attendance credit election, which Mr. Hill, our district chief financial officer, is going to explain all the details, and he's going to outline the process for us and what it means for our community and the future of our school district. And then David Hicks is our chief information officer, and he is going to facilitate the question and answer session at the end. So David, I don't know if you want to explain the Q&A format, and then we'll turn it over to Mr. Hill and let him get underway.
Thank you, Dr. Bullock. So yes, we are using Zoom webinar feature tonight. We had about 85 people that signed up to attend the meeting. And so we're slowly starting to see those numbers trickle in. We are utilizing the Q&A feature that you'll see kind of at the bottom of your Zoom app. So just use that Q&A anytime throughout the Mr. Hill's presentation. Just go ahead and type in your question. And then as soon as Mr. Hill's presentation comes to a close, we will begin to answer those as they relate to this attendance credit election. And so with that, I will throw it to Johnny Hill.
Thank you, Mr. Hicks. My name is Johnny Hill, and I have the honor of serving as the Chief Financial Officer here at Allen ISD. I've been with the district only a few months, about 5 months, but I have known about Allen ISD for years. I moved from Lake Travis ISD, which is where I served for the last 12 years, and this is my 27th year in school business. And I am just very, very honored and thrilled to be with Allen ISD. Both my kids are grown educators and live in the area, and have been looking forward to actually moving closer to them for the last couple of years. And when this job came open, I was super, super thrilled because of the excellence in education that Allen ISD has. I believe first of all, I wanted to thank you for being here this evening. And I believe that it's definitely worth your time. It's a very, very important topic. And it's one that is very, very dear, or should be dear to each of your hearts. So I'm going to go through this, the presentation. I'll try to go through it slow. More than happy to answer any questions at the end that you might have, or any concerns that you might have. My goal this evening is to be informative, but also be extremely transparent with what we're trying to accomplish here. So one thing that's important, and that is we will be having an election required by state law, and the election will be May 1st of this year. And what's really important is the school district is at risk of losing value. Almost $3 billion, or a little bit over $3 billion of our tax base is at risk of loss. And so the important thing to note with that is that each of you, if you are a voting member here in Allen ISD, you have the opportunity to prevent this loss. So 5 key takeaways or considerations that I do want to go over briefly this evening. And that is just explain a little bit about what an attendance credit election is. And then number 2, what happens if the measure fails on May the 1st of 21? And then what happens if the measure passes in May on the May election? And then when and where can Allen ISD residents vote? And then where can the voters get more information? First of all, what is an attendance credit election? The attendance credit election, it's state required, but it's only a one-time election. So once we have hold this election in May, we do not have to hold it anymore. It's not an annual or periodic election. We have to do it one time and we're done. But what we're asking the voters to approve is the district to pay recapture by purchasing attendance credits from the state with local tax revenue. And simply put, attendance credit is simply the name given that the district equalizes its wealth through the payment of recapture payments. Previously, we were able to pay the recapture by netting it against state funding. So if you don't have a whole lot of recapture that you have to pay back to the state, in other words, in Allen ISD, we pay just a little over $1 million in recapture. We actually collect almost $30 million of state fundings. And so the state has allowed us under the previous education code to just net the two, and they just sent us $1 million less than state monies. But under House Bill 3, this last legislative session, they did away with that little exemption in state law. As a result, it triggers us having to hold this election. We can no longer net the recapture against state funding. And so we have to go out to the voters and get their permission to send it from taxes back to the state. So obviously Allen ISD is considered property wealthy. And what that simply means is that we collect more revenue than what we're allowed to collect by the state. This excess revenue is recaptured and sent back to the state where it's redistributed to property poor districts all around the state. We call this recapture. We call this equalization, Robin Hood. It all means the same thing. So a question that will always come up, and that is, well, why can't, if you've got more wealth than you need, why can't you just lower the tax rate so we don't have to pay the recapture back? And I think that's a very valid question. And I think it's important to know that we can lower our tax rate down enough that we wouldn't have to pay recapture. The issue and the problem that we have with this is that we would have to lower down pennies on our tax rate or M&O tax rate that are considered enriched, the enrichment pennies. So for us to get rid of the $1.2 million that we have in recapture, we would have to give up or be penalized about $4.9 million in revenue. So we do pay recapture of 1.2, but because those are enriched pennies, we get $4.9 million in return. So it's a good bargain for the school district. An issue that we have in our school district for us to give up that $4.9 million because approximately 83% of our budget is in the form of personnel. For us to actually cut our budget that much would mean getting into our personnel, which is teachers and support positions throughout our district. So at this time, we do not feel like it's feasible in order to stop paying this recapture. A little bit of history about recapture in Allen ISD. We have actually been considered property wealthy since 2011. And at that time, we started equalizing or paying back our recapture to the state in a method called purchasing attendance credits. The reason why we use this method is we were able to maintain local control, and it was the cheapest way for us to actually equalize. It was the most cost-effective approach for us to do this. Across the state of Texas, there are approximately a little over 200 school districts, almost 20%, that are considered property wealthy. 100% of those districts actually pay recapture or equalize their wealth through the purchase of attendance credits. The reason why they do that, it's the cheapest way for them to actually go about, the most cost-effective way for them to go about equalizing their wealth. So what happens if the measure fails? And I think it's important to go through these steps because obviously it can be pretty pretty substantial if we don't pass this election in May. The state, the Texas Education Agency, are very specific with the steps they have to take in order to equalize the wealth. What they do is they go out and they start detaching a territory or commercial property from our tax rolls, and they give those territories to property poor districts around us. So for us, in order to get rid of paying that $1.2 million in recapture, we would actually have to, the state or the TEA would have to come and detach approximately $3 billion of our value. If you want to do the simple math on that, you take the $3 billion, divide it by per $100 of valuation, and multiply that times that 3.89 cents, which is those enrichment pennies, and you get right at the $1.2 million of recapture. That's how we back into the value that we would have to detach, the $3 billion. But just to let you know exactly what percentage that is of our overall tax roll, the state would actually detach just a hair under 20% of our value. A little under 20% of our value is what they would have to detach. It's significant. So obviously, whenever they detach this commercial property, we still have to make our debt payments, our annual debt payments that we have to make. And so if they come and take this commercial property out of our tax rolls, obviously that means that the residential owners in our school district would have to pick up that difference. It would be approximately additional 9 cents to the INS tax roll. What does that mean for an average taxpayer in our school district? Well, an average home, market value home in our district is about $375,000. If you do the simple math on the 375, you divide it by 100, multiply it times 9 cents, you get an estimated increase for an average homeowner in Allen ISD of a little under $340 per year. That's quite a bit of an increase in order to make up what they're losing in commercial property in our school district. Just to look at it in a different way, on our audit report, on our CAFR report, every time we present out on an annual basis, we always present the top 10 taxpayers in our school district. And I thought this was important just to kind of put a face or a name to some of these properties, commercial properties that would be detached. And so these are just the top, what you see in front of you is just the top 10 taxpayers for this last year. Obviously, you can see the Waters Creek. Those are some housing developments at the very top. You see the Allen Premium Outlets, everybody knows where that's at. And of course, you can see some of these other commercial properties. Just if you add the top 10 commercial properties, you don't even come up with $1 billion. And as I mentioned before, the state would detach a little over $3 billion. And so what they would do, they would take all of our commercial properties from the top value all the way down to the low value, and they would keep detaching until they actually receive the $3 billion of value. Now, a couple things that's really important with this, and that is, I think everybody needs to know this, and that is the loss of this revenue of these properties, commercial properties, it's permanent. So even if our other value goes down in the future, we cannot go back out and reattach this property. Once we lose it, it's gone. So the increases in values of the premium outlet malls in Allen, we would never get those back. It's permanent, and it also means that we can no longer have that control of the tax value there. So two things that I think is really important to note is it's permanent, and we lose our local control over that tax base. So let's talk a little bit if this measure passes on May the 1st. We would continue to keep making attendance credits. We would continue making our recapture payments just like we have for the last 10 years. We would calculate it, which is the most efficient way. You can see right here what we've paid in recapture over those years. And we're projected this current year just to pay a little bit under $1.2 million. One thing that I think that's very, very important to note is the tax rate would not go up as a result. In fact, our tax rate is anticipated to go down just about 1.3 cents for this next year. That only happens if this measure passes. We would continue to receive the same amount of money, that $4.9 million that we talked about earlier. We would be able to keep doing that to pay teachers, to pay support staff in our school district, to be able to continue to provide the programs that we're currently offering. And so I'm going to stop here. I'm going to turn it over to David to talk about when and where our residents can vote and to get a little bit more detailed information.
Thank you, Johnny. So voting does open up here in a couple of months, and we'll get to those dates here in just a second, but do want to notify you of where you can vote. And so one location is the City of Allen Municipal Court. That's located right next to City Hall, kind of by the downtown area. This is different from the November election. They had moved that over to the Allen Event Center. But for this May, they are moving that back to the municipal court. And we are also opening up the Allen ISD Service Center on North Waters Road, so that both of these locations will be available for voting, for both early voting and on election day. And so if we head to this next slide, we can see when that begins. And so early voting does begin on April 19th. That is a Monday, and it'll run through Saturday, the 24th. So that Monday through Saturday. It'll close down on Sunday, and it'll open up again on Monday, the 26th, and Tuesday, the 27th. So that'll be your block of early voting time. And then actual election day will be held on Saturday, May 1st. And typically some additional, voting sites might be opened on Saturday. Kind of depends on what the county is doing, but I would kind of bet on the municipal court and the service center to be your two main voting locations here in Allen for that block of time. And one other thing to note, if you are not yet registered to vote, that deadline is April 1st. So your registration has to be postmarked by that date. So you have about 60 days to get that in. Last day to register vote is April 1st. And so when you actually go to your polling location, you will see this language right here in the quotation marks. It says, authorizing the Board of Trustees of Allen Independent School District to purchase attendance credit from the state using local tax revenue. That's what you'll see. And so just as a reminder to kind of recap, a vote for that measure would allow the Allen ISD Board of Trustees to continue the usage of purchasing attendance credit from the state. And again, that process has been used since 2011. So it's just, it's a simple paperwork procedure, if you will, to continue that same process. And again, as Johnny went over, a vote against means that the board does not have that authorization to purchase that attendance credit. And that's when the TEA, the state, would come in and actually detach that commercial property from Allen ISD's tax revenue and send that to another district. So where can you get more information? Well, obviously you're here, so you wanted this kind of information. So we do appreciate you being here on the call tonight. We do plan to host many more community meetings. Some of them will be a little bit more targeted, like our community groups, the Rotaries, Kiwanis, Lions Club, PTAs. We have many presentations for our teachers and staff. So we do plan to host many more of these Zoom meetings. And maybe later in the spring, maybe we can actually host an in-person meeting. That would be nice.
It'd be nice.
And then for the website, we do have a website set up, a specific web page about the attendance credit election that you can check out at any time. We are adding more information to that, but allenisd.org/2021 attendance. So if you go to that website, and if there's a link right on the front page of our district website as well. So a lot of information there, a lot of what Johnny shared today. I mean, if you have any specific questions, you can also email our email address, publicinfo@allenisd.org. And we would be happy to answer any questions that you have.
Absolutely. And just to add to that, before we get to the question and answers, we'll give you time to kind of think through some of your questions. I already see one posted. If you can think of, a group that we need to talk to, if you want us to come and talk to either Zoom or in person, any community group that you have or that you may be a part of, or your neighborhood group, we are here just like we did in the bond election. We did a lot of presentations. And like I said, our main goal is to make sure that our voters are informed and our community is informed of what's going on. And so we are here to answer anything. One of the comments in the chat, I see a couple of questions in the Q&A and one in the chat in particular. It's Kirk says, okay, what am I missing? Why would any Allen ISD family be opposed to this? And Johnny, I don't know if you can or want to answer. I can tell you that I don't know of why you would, because the things that Mr. Hill described is a reality for our community, our school district, and most definitely and importantly our taxpayers as well.
I can say that this has been going on since 1995. Districts have been holding this one-time election since 1995, and over 200 elections have taken place. I can say that there's only been one election that's failed, and they petitioned TEA to go back and hold it a second time once they educated their populace, and they were successful the second time. But I can say that it's the only time that the one district did not pass it. They felt like that they would force the state. They thought the state wouldn't actually go through with detaching their property because they were paying approximately about $400 million of recapture, which was a very, very large sum. They did not think the state would go through with the process. And once they failed it, the state actually started detaching the property, and they actually went back and voted it in at that time. So I can say over 200 elections, and all but one of them has been successful because it's really a very easy decision for the taxpayers once they're educated on what this actually means.
Thank you, Johnny. Johnny, do you want to talk about, are there any other local districts that maybe, have already gone through this process? Like, why is Allen ISD going through this right now?
Well, the reason we are, and we're not the only ones. I believe Little Elm just had theirs in November. And of course, McKinney is actually holding theirs in May, the same time we have. So districts like Allen ISD that pay a pretty small, relatively small amount of recapture, they've been just netting it. It's easier for them to net it because they don't have to go through the expense and the time of actually holding an election. And so that's what they've been doing. The only reason it's changed now is because House Bill 3 inadvertently, actually, when they moved from one part of the code, which was chapter 41, to a new part of the education code, chapter 49, they inadvertently left off the little piece that allowed you to net. And of course, they may go back and change that in the future, but for right now, it actually prompts us to actually hold this election. And that's why McKinney's doing it now. That's why we're doing it now. That's why Little Elm just did it, is because of House Bill 3.
Okay, thank you, Johnny. So this is a similar question to kind of what we had in the first one, but Johnny, again, the question is, what is and is there a downside to the measure passing?
And the answer would be no. I mean, because we've ran the math multiple times, and it's the same math that every other school district has ran. The state will equalize wealth. They're required by law to do that. There is only one method that actually keeps control locally, and it's also by far the most efficient, or it's the less expensive way to do this, and that is through the purchase of attendance credit. So the state's going to equalize wealth no matter what. This is the best way for our district to accomplish that. So there is no downside. This is the best way that we can actually, this is the best outcome that we can actually hope for.
Thank you, Johnny. There's a question here. It says, does detaching property have any effect on other things funded by property taxes, or does this only affect Allen ISD's funding?
This will only affect school district funding. This is not relevant to the city or the county or any kind of hospitalization or MUD. This is specific just to school funding.
Oh, there's another question from Debbie. That's a good one too.
It says, by passing this, will it have any detrimental effect on property poor districts?
No, sir, because the state's required on property poor districts, they're required still to go up to this equalized wealth level. So if they're not able to get there on their own, the state will make up that difference with those districts.
So Johnny, kind of what you're saying here is that, this vote doesn't say, we approve of Robin Hood recapture, or we disapprove of Robin Hood recapture. Really what it comes down to is the state has identified that saying you owe this dollar amount and you have to pay it. And so you can either have the election and pay it with a check, or we'll detach the property and get the money that way. Is that correct?
That is correct. They actually they actually lay out 5 different options for a school district to actually equalize the wealth. But this is the only option that we maintain local control, which is really important to our board and also to our administration. And it's also we actually don't lose the property value. This is by far the most efficient, best way for our school district to actually equalize that wealth.
Hey, Johnny, here's a really good question here. It says, I assume that if a business that would have been detached goes away, would the state then just go ahead and detach other properties to make up that difference?
That's a really good question. So the state would, if part of the businesses that were detached actually lose their value, or if we continue to have more value over that equalized wealth level, the state would actually come back and start detaching additional properties. They would look at this on an annual basis. If they don't have enough, if we haven't lowered enough of our property to equalize it, they'll come back on an annual basis and take additional commercial property.
There's another question here. It says, curious what groups, if any, support not passing this. And so, I'm not aware of any formalized opposition to it, but what I would say, that's why we're here with you tonight, because we just want to go out and make sure that whenever you do go to your polling location, that you have all the information, that you have the facts from Allen ISD. So if there are any groups that feel strongly that this should not pass, we would be happy to sit down with them and talk them through it. And if that's still the way they feel, then that's the way they feel. But we believe that by having these informational sessions, that we can give everybody the information that they need.
And David, I think that's so important, because the only opposition I could see anybody might have to this, if they thought that for some reason we could get out of having to pay a recapture or equalize our wealth, and that's just not the case. I mean, we've had multiple conversations with TEA, and we've seen it actually take place in real life with another district. They don't have a choice. If we fail this, they will take steps to equalize it by detaching property.
And I'll answer part of Debbie's question too, because if some of you on the call may remember, we started this process back before, was it last November, David? Or last May? Which one?
It was, we started last January, a year ago.
Last January, and we had to postpone it when we shut down schools, and of course COVID hit. But to answer Debbie's question, we didn't at that time have any organized opposition, against it. But to David's point, that's what we're here to do, is to make sure that, like we said, starting out, that we have an informed community, an informed group of voters, so that at least people have the facts go into the polls, as David stated a little bit earlier. But when we started this, and like I said, had to postpone it, we didn't, David, to my knowledge, have anybody, once they kind of heard the presentation, kind of going back to even what Kirk said a little bit ago, that once people at least heard it, they were like, this is something that we need to do for our community.
Yes, absolutely. Robin, you hit the nail on the head there. Kind of going through what did we get, maybe a month or two of the election in before the county canceled the May elections. But yeah, some people would come to us and they might be upset about Robin Hood or recapture. But again, we just had to emphasize the fact that this was not a vote about, doing away with this. I mean, it's just simply the fact of the state requires us to hold this election. And so we'll go out there and share all the facts that we can. So again, I put my email address in the chat. We'd be happy to, during the day, in the evening, maybe not this Sunday, we're going to be watching some football on Sunday, but any other time, we'll be happy to host a meeting if you can get a group together. So please reach out to me.
And with the bond election, don't think your group is too small, because with the bond election, we presented to 1 or 2 people up to about 200 people. And so we are very willing to do either. So if you've got a group, like I said, a community that you would want us to reach out to, we are certainly willing, as David said, to do that.
Dr. Bullock, I am not seeing any other questions come in. I'll give it just maybe a second here, but it's been about 5 minutes since the last question.
Okay, well, we will go ahead and wrap up then. Thank you so much, as I said earlier, for giving up a bit of your time to us this evening. It is great to see people on and trying to get information. And as we said, please don't hesitate to reach out if you have a question, even if you see something online that may not be accurate, or something that you may have a question about or is contradictory to what we talked about tonight. please let us know. We can arm you with the information. We can follow up with the person and correct any misinformation that's out there, because that's what we want to make sure doesn't happen, is that we don't have misinformation out there. And so some of this is really confusing and really hard to understand. And so we will take all the time that's needed to make sure that we explain it to as many people who want to hear it. Okay, David, I don't see anything else.
I think we're good.